turn the floor over to Bill because Bill was upset that I didn't give him enough time last time. So I'm going to turn the microphone around to Bill and go for it.
Yeah, now that I'm finished stomping my feet in anger. Last time we were here, everyone. I remember I gave a quote, but I don't remember what it was, and I don't remember. I had a list of quotes which I'll hand out, but I don't remember the context for all of these anymore. It's been a month, so I will try to just. What I was interested in was spirit, because I was working on something where I needed to understand what spirit was, and so I developed I developed my own definition of spirit. Because and what started that was there was a meetup going on where they were going to have a conversation, and they were going to talk about free will. And I thought, well, okay, how do we talk about free will? Now that's a pretty good topic to go into. So, is it totally illusion, or is there something you actually, are free to choose? So once I got thinking about it, I sort of had a schema I developed in my own mind about what spirit is, and when I thought of spirit, I thought, well, there's soul. And a lot of times people talk about spirit and soul in the same, well, interchangeably sometimes, and then other times there seems to be a distinction. And my way of thinking about it had always been that soul came from within and spirit came from without. So and I could explain that more, but I wanted to go to the quote, some of these Jungian quotes. Some of which I'm not sure how they fit in because I don't remember why I included them. But I think the first one and the last one are relevant. So I'm going to start with the first one and read it to you. If we are to do justice to the essence of the thing we call spirit, we should really speak of a higher consciousness rather than of the unconscious, because the concept of spirit is such that we are bound to connect it with the idea of superiority over the ego consciousness. Okay, discuss it.
Okay, Professor.
So, look at that for a minute and see what you understand spirit as when after reading that.
Dirk has also asked if there's something such as absolute free will.
There's something such as...
If there's something such as absolute free will from Dirk.
Okay.
Absolute free will. I don't even know what that means actually, because I haven't even. I think free will in itself is pretty tentative. I think I think we're pretty lucky if we have any free will, and I think you got to be pretty evolved to have it. As far as absolute free will, I'm not sure what that means, except it almost sounds superhuman somehow.
Yeah.
If they want to explain what it is.
Okay. I never claimed to be a Nietzsche expert, and so I can't really opine on free will per se. Although I do know that Jungians try to free you up so that you can do what your spirit wants you to do. Okay. Now, spirit is sort of both above and below in a sense, because I mean, in terms of Jungian psychology, as opposed to anybody else's ideas, right? Because spirit is that which makes us do the things that we do. Okay, whatever it is. And so spirit is the thing that makes us design and manufacture a microphone, for example. And so it's the psychic energy. From a Jungian perspective, it would be the psychic energy that's pushing through you. Pardon?
No, I disagreed with you.
Okay, you disagreed with
Well,
me.
I disagreed with you when we were at that concert. You brought this up, and I said,
Okay.
no, that's libido. That's 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 not spirit. But in another sense, it is spirit. But it's not. It's not. I was looking at it psychologically, and so when I think of what drives the green fuse, the force through the green fuse, then it's libido for humans anyway.
I,
I think spirit has a really deep meaning, really deeper. Like when you're doing and behaving and you're all connected with your logos and you're saying all the right things and you're in the right place, your spirit starts to come through more. This is my thinking.
Okay.
Because it's deeper. I mean, it's not superficial. It's, I don't
Okay.
think I know how to explain it as well as,
That's why I wanted
know.
to bring it up.
I
Because
think.
I don't think anybody explains it
No,
very
and I
well.
think we act upon it, or could act upon it, if we're aware of what our spirit is trying to help us do.
is what causes us to act. Okay. And I think spirit and libido are the same thing. Okay. Spirit is a psychic energy.
Okay. Well,
So it's like
everything is psychic energy in that regard because
it's
the
your spirit that
psyche is
guides
real.
you, like from a religious perspective. Your spirit. When I think of spirit, I think of like a religious
Right.
context, and your spirit's the thing that guides you towards
Yeah.
good. It compels you to do
Right.
good
Or bad.
or bad, I guess. Yeah.
Okay. So, yeah, I mean, from a Jungian perspective, it would be the spirit is guiding you to do either good or bad. Okay. And because Dr. Jung was very much into the conjunctio oppositorum, which is the conjunction of the opposites, right? And so spirit is either driving you to be an angel or the devil, right? And it brings up a very interesting thing that I was talking about yesterday from Dr. Ulanoff, which I'll go into in a minute, because I've only named over many years, but maybe I should address it just briefly. Okay. But I did a 2 hour video on it yesterday where I read what she said. Okay. And so, first of all, you need to understand that Dr. Jung took the position that he was never talking about the metaphysical God. Okay, in other words, not the God of theologians. He was talking about what he could empirically refer to in the psyche. Okay, and so what he called that is the God image. Okay, or he also called it the self. It's also called the greater personality. It has a lot of names in Jungian psychology, but basically in Jungian psychology there are two centers. One center is the ego, and one center is the self. Now, in terms of religion, Christ represents the ego, and Buddha represents the self. Okay, in that dichotomy. Okay, and and so Edinger took the position that what Jung did, the enormous thing that Jung did, was to break himself out of all religion. Okay, and he was the son of a Swiss Reformed pastor. Okay, and so he was steeped in it all his life. But he said when he went to be confirmed, nothing happened for him. Okay, and about the same time, he had a vision, and his vision was that God the Father squatted over the Cathedral of Basel and dropped a heavy one on the Cathedral of Basel, which destroyed the cathedral. It didn't happen in actuality, of course, but he had this vision, and he said that after he had this vision, he had this most wonderful sense of peace.
Yes, God did too.
Relief.
Finally.
So, are you still seeing?
Yeah, I'll do.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, I'll get back to Dirk here in a second.
All right. So let me keep going on this for a minute. So anyway, one of the things that he got to in his 40 years of study was that in the God image, not in the metaphysical God, but in the psyche, and he had empirical evidence for this as a psychologist, as a clinical psychologist. The God image is a oppositorum, okay, and which means that God is both good and bad. And this was one of the main things that he brought up in answer to Job, okay, in his book Answer to Job, which is sort of a it's sort of like a central point in his 20 volumes of collected works, right? And and so and then he wrote a book called Ion, which is volume 9 2 of the collected works. And in Ion, he he talked about the phenomenology of the self. In other words, how the self has emerged over the last 3,500 years as we know it from Scripture. Okay. And so one of the main things he was talking about was this idea of privatio boni, which is an idea that came up in the early church, which said that there is no such thing as evil. God is all good. God is all good, and and evil is simply the privation of good. Okay, and so the controversial thing that he said in answer to Job is no, God is also bad. Okay, but actually he didn't say that. He didn't say that about the metaphysical God. He said that about the deepest archetype in the psyche, which is the self, which is the God image. Okay, and so that can be both good or bad. Okay, now we come to Anne Belford Ulanoff. Okay, so tonight I'm referring to two books, The Living God and Our Living Psyche. What Christians Can Learn from Carl Jung, and an earlier book of hers, The Wisdom of the Psyche. Now, for some reason, this crazy system is reversing my image, and I don't understand why. I don't know. For whatever reason, you're getting a reversed image, so, and I apologize for that. But anyway, so Anne Ulanoff is a unique figure. I've heard of her before 2017, but I physically went to see her in June of 2017 for the first time. And that led me to into some of her books. And the unique thing that I got from about her as part of her resume, and it's quite an extensive resume, is that she is emerita, which means retired now, professor of psychiatry and religion at Union Theological Seminary, which was one of the leading Protestant seminaries in the United States, in New York City. And I know, for example, that many of the Presbyterian pastors that I've had over my lifetime have gone to Union Theological Seminary, among many others. And so the fact that she has this title of professor of psychiatry and religion is a very interesting thing. Okay, so then we come to two books that she wrote. Now, she wrote 16 books by herself, and she wrote 6 books with her husband, whose name was Barry Orenoff. Unfortunately, Barry has died, but Anne is very much alive. And what really caught me the other day when I was reading this book, The Wisdom of the Psyche, is that she made this comment. Jung fell for the devil's trick. Now, what was the devil's trick? Okay, let me go back to the previous paragraph. I actually read this at length yesterday, but let me share it with you. The devil loves to trick us away from the real cross to the false one. Okay, he offers with particular skill in the late 20th century, in the time of existential rhetoric, the lure of nothingness to make something into nothing and nothing into something. The woman who glowed with new consciousness of being, valued for herself, was tempted to make it nothing by not knowing about it, by not keeping it in her consciousness. This is one of her clinical clients, okay? And then she says, the dreamer was tempted to get stuck in arguing the case either for or against a position about homosexuality and losing sight of the real connection between parent and child. So Jung attacked the Christian notion of evil as the privation of good, as a making of nothing out of something of evil. Evil is real. Jung argued, not a privation. He felt the traditional idea dangerously tempted us to deny the reality of our own shadows and of evil itself. Okay, now, what's significant here is the issue of homosexuality. We won't take any position on that, but her point is that in a family where, let's suppose, a young man age 20 would come out, then if you get into an argument about whether homosexuality is good or bad, okay, then that's the devil, okay, that's the devil's trick, because the real issue is how to keep your family together, and how to love your child and have the relationship with your child. That's the real issue. But what we keep arguing, and we do it in our politics today all the time, we keep arguing about issues that aren't about keeping us together, let's say, okay? The United States of America. What makes us the United States of America as opposed to all these little freaking tribes running around the place, right? And so what she said here was, Jung fell for the devil's trick, I think, and missed the sophisticated psychological description of the privatio boni gives us of evil's reality. For what is evil, after all? What is its reality? Now, Jung argued heavily that evil is very much real and very much a thing, okay? But I'll just skip ahead. She said, what Jung was after, I believe, is the psychological and religious truth that we must admit to ourselves just how strong evil is. It is not something we can get around or ignore. What he missed, I believe, is the greater theological truth that good is stronger than evil and of a different order of being. Created being is good. Okay, now, she's quite right that throughout Jung's career, he avoided talking about theology, okay? And since his death, Jungian psychologists have pretty much held discussions about religion at arm's length, okay? But what tipped me off about this was a lecture by Edward Edinger where he said the purpose of Jungian analysis is to have you have an experience, have a religious experience, the purpose of it. And so you're going to go through this analysis until you get this aha moment, okay? And when you have this aha moment, then, as he said, and you can find this on YouTube, as he said, you you don't have to believe, you know, okay? And it's not something that anybody can take away from you, okay? Now, when I saw that video for the first time, I had an epiphany because I said, aha, I know too, okay? And I did, at that point, I didn't know why I knew or what my experience was that made me know, but I know, okay? And so what I've, over the years now, discovered is that that's the basis of Alcoholics Anonymous. That's the basis of all 12-step programs, too. Because if you have, apparently the third step of the 12 is to have a religious experience. And if you have that religious experience, then you have a choice. Then you have, that's where free will comes in. Okay, and Ulanoff talks about it in this other book 20 years later. And so what I think she maybe evolved herself a bit here. Pardon?
Pull everybody in.
Okay, so I'm just trying to bring you up to speed on this one idea, then I'll shut up. Okay, so what she said is that she's basically agreeing with Jung, okay, and Jung never said anything about the metaphysical God, but her point is that he should have. Okay, that what we're missing in our society today is that the psychologists have stayed in their lane and the theologians have stayed in their lane, but where they should be is in both lanes, which is what she was, obviously, through her career based on her titles, right? And so, and her point is that anything that drives us apart amounts to the devil, okay, amounts to evil. And the things that bring us together in family, I mean, she's doing it from a clinical psychologist point of view. The things that bring us together are good. And so anyway, she says here, and this is an important point. Let me just make this last point, and then I'll shut up, Bill.
The problem with that is it discounts any kind of goodness or virtue to the solitude of the inventor or the renegade artist. You know, I don't necessarily agree with that.
The goodness, badness.
She's saying that the creative, that the created, and I'll come back to that in a minute. But she's saying that the being and creating being is the good, and that evil is destruction. Okay, the destruction of that.
But see, those are two sides of the same coin.
Yeah, that's
You've got to destroy in order to create, you know. And you create, you've destroyed something. Yeah, it's just.
Okay, all right, but here's what she says. What she says is there's this tiny bit of space that, from a clinical psychologist's point of view, you're trying to create in your client a bit of psychological space in which they have this free will that our user here is asking about. Okay, but then she says, we all know the dangerous passage in successful clinical work where the person is no longer caught by an addiction or compulsion or despondent depression. Now there is a tiny but clear bit of elbow room. They see it, know the alternatives, can fight it, can choose otherwise. At this moment, every clinician is completely dependent on his or her clients. which way will they choose? We cannot choose for them, but only wait and hope. And so that's the issue that sort of is being talked about here. All right. So, Bill, go ahead. You have some.
Okay. Well, I'll skip to the end here.
No, read them all.
No, I don't want to read all of them because I can't remember why I wrote all of them down. You
We'll
know,
figure it out.
I want to go to the last one first.
All right.
Because, so I'll go slow so you can hear it over the airwaves. Life and spirit are two powers or necessities between which man is placed. Man being human beings are placed. Spirit gives meaning to his life and the possibility of its greatest development. But life is essential to spirit, since its truth is nothing if it cannot live. Now, to me, that was the closest he came to what I think of as spirit and soul. If you replace life with soul, you get soul and spirit are two powers or necessities between which the human is placed. And my way of thinking about it, after some study, and also because I'm writing something that involves needing to have this mapped out, you've got soul and spirit. Whereas, well, let's look at it in terms of like a astrology chart. If you know anything about astrology, you know the planets are up there and they mean something, and you know that the planets are in houses and that means something. Well, the planets are in this case are, let's call them potential, the soul. We could call the soul potential. That's coming from within. So that's what you have that you can contribute to the world, right? Spirit is coming from the outside. It's the houses. It's where, so in the chart you see the houses and you say, oh, my planet's in that house. That means there's an emphasis on in that house for this potential that I have. So what you have in the houses are the possibilities. So you got potential and possibilities. So, and that corresponds to soul and spirit. And so these are two things, like in an astrology chart, that are actually your fates. You have two fates, F-A-T-E-S, fates. And so these two giant wheels are sort of spinning around, and there we are in between these two wheels of fate. And in terms of psychology, that's the ego. So you're negotiating between what your potential is and what the possibilities are. And so free will comes in to the extent that you are evolved enough to where you're realizing your potential and recognizing your possibilities. So
Do you see that as the logos eros dichotomy?
no. Those are sort of like perpendicular, I think. So that's why when I say instead of life and spirit, I think if you said soul and spirit are the two powers or necessities between man and his place, you substitute soul. Spirit gives meaning to his life. Those are the things you engage with, the possibilities, and the possibility of its greatest development. Spirit. And then you have soul, which is your potential, and without the potential, the spirit would mean nothing. But so, where is spirit coming from? If soul is coming from within, and you're given a certain potential, got abilities and so forth, and then spirit is actually sort of the social realm, the environment in which you're born into, and so that those are your possibilities, and those, because we bring culture from that side, from the spirit side, that helps define our spirit. So it's easy to see how they get mixed up, because we incorporate spirit within our psyche, within our ego, because by negotiating our potential with what our possibilities are, that's how we represent things and develop an ego. So nowhere in there does he actually define it that way, but that's the way I would see it, and I went into his looking for his quotes to see if there was anything in there that resembled that, and this last quote is the one that seemed to most resemble my own thoughts about it.
So read the quote again.
All right, now the quote is, life and spirit are two powers or necessities between which man is placed. Spirit gives meaning to his life and the possibility of its greatest development. But life is essential to spirit, since its truth is nothing if it cannot live. To me, that seems to fit really, really well, considering that we're talking
All right.
two
Well,
different languages.
yeah. What I think is useful is the Da Vinci quote. Okay, there's a quote from Da Vinci by who wrote the Da Vinci biography, Walter or somebody. Same guy that wrote Hamilton, I think. But anyway, the quote that he comes up with from Da Vinci is, "Who goes to the water jar when they have access to the fountain?" Okay, and my criticism of Jordan Peterson, and I have a ongoing theoretical debate with Jordan Peterson because I've never spoken to him, although I have known of him and known. I know I'm one person removed from Jordan Peterson, and I have had that connection since like 2014, so before his controversy, right? But Jordan Peterson wants to establish rules, okay, and that's what all college professors do. They provide you with a whole series of rules. The problem is you can't live with that, and there's no life in that.
J's.
Pardon?
It's a J.
Yeah, it's a J, right? And so
But it's also a way of conservative thinking, because you want to slot things out so that you've got security. In other words, a democracy is built on process, and in order to have absolute conservative idea of, say, government, you need to put things in slots. You need to break it up. You need to categorize, and you need to get rid of process.
you know what I heard Damien say. Yeah, you want order, right? Right?
Yeah, but you can.
And what I heard you say when you came and sat down here for the first time was that you like Jordan Peterson and
I
the
know him, that's why, yeah.
and the rules of life, okay, which is a very masculine thing to do. Okay, give me the rules. I want to know what all the rules of football are, and then I can watch the television all day and tell whether people are playing by the rules or not, right? Okay. But that's not life, okay? Because what's happening after the quarterback gets manhandled is somebody's yanking on his face guard, right? And the refs aren't seeing that, and the TV isn't seeing that, but they know how to do it in such a way that he's going to be disabled or whatever. I mean, that's only a stupid example, but people cheat, okay? Pardon? Constantly. I mean, I don't know if you remember, but I certainly remember 1973. OPEC seemed very powerful, and I would also thought it was powerful at that time. Then I went to business school and talked about the power of this what do you call it? Cabal. Okay. Pardon? Cartel, okay. And my professor says, "Oh, well, don't worry about that because people always cheat in cartels." And that's exactly what happened. And we started to get our oil from Venezuela then. And those guys were out of luck because once they put their tankers out to sea, then they're in the world oil market. And then anybody can buy that tanker load of oil as it's going across the world, right? And today or yesterday, we heard that Qatar has withdrawn from OPEC
After 60 years.
right after 60 years. So my point is that we need logos, okay, which is what Jordan Peterson talks about, and we'll have to come back to that. But we need logos because if you're going to build a wine glass or an automobile or any other such thing, you need perfection. Okay, when I buy an automobile, I expect perfection. I expect it to be a perfect automobile of that type, and that's true of everything that we have. A pen, and so we need logos for that sort of thing, but we can't live in that. Okay, if you take the Bible as an example, the Bible is just a bunch of pages and words on the page, but it doesn't mean a thing. It's just a black book doorstop until you put life into it. Okay, until you actually get your spirit into it. Now that's my point. You're saying no.
No, I don't know. Spirit is such a fluid concept here. I just wanted to see what people thought. I don't. I would say, in my world, it's not spirit you get into it. It's nature. You get some form of nature. You get, when you're talking about logos, you're talking about, in the case of an automobile, extreme articulation.
Right.
But in the Bible, I thought you were going to go with sort of the poetic and the metaphor and the ability to insert life into it, in the sense that you experience it because you have to fill in the images and so forth. So that's a very different
And
relationship.
that's what Owen Office said.
But that's not spirit. I mean,
All right, but okay. So
not-
wait a
it's
minute.
different. It's
We're
categorical.
sitting in a restaurant that has booths in it, right? Okay. So let's suppose that each one of us wants to design a better booth, okay? And so we know functionally what a booth has to be like from a logos point of view. It needs to be the seat needs to be a certain amount off the floor, and you have to have a certain sound deadening behind you, and so on. But and so that's logos, okay. But then the spirit
Logos, not a word for rule.
for rule, yeah,
It's the same.
right, okay. I mean, rule falls within logos.
Without it, there would be
Chaos, right.
the legs wouldn't work.
Well,
Right.
Logic is the
Right,
word. If
okay,
you think of
because-
logic, you think of
Yeah,
logos.
because
that's an extreme
that's
articulation.
right. So engineers are all about logos, right? Because they're making something out of
Whereas
X out
Eros
of
is like
Y.
field theory. It's like you've got how things relate to one another in a field dynamic, not in terms of any kind of linear.
Right. So what I would say is that if we're designing a booth, and each one of us has to design one, then we're bringing our spirit into that process. We know what a functional booth has to look like, but every one of our booths is going to be different,
Well,
right?
see, then I could say, well, that's just cultural differences. If you're a Chinaman, you're going to bring your China culture into it. Which
Precisely.
Is the
What-
spirit of China is in it.
That's your spirit.
Right, right, and that's exactly Jung's point.
Possibilities of understanding it.
Right, that's exactly Jung's.
Your environment that you grew up in or whatever is brought and expressed through whatever it is you're doing.
Right, and that's Jung's point about religion, which is that they're all the same, basically. Okay, whether it's well,
Maybe in intent.
they're all the same in intent. There are some that fall on this self end of the spectrum, as opposed to the ego end of the spectrum. Okay, but they both are coming from the same basic bottom. Okay,
Or the same basic emptiness or something. that needs
emptiness,
to be
something,
filled.
whatever,
Yeah.
yeah, and it has to be built upon. But it's identical around the world in every religion.
That's why archetypes work. Yeah.
And that's why archetypes work, precisely. Okay. So somebody put a long thing there.
All right, who's got another
Okay.
quote?
Why do you think that in recent years art and imagination has taken a back seat in society? Could this be the dark side of logos? Why is the lust for power an overpowering force in this age of being?
I think I'll go take a break.
Question.
That one's, you gotta wind. You'll get Skip will get wound up.
No,
on
no, no.
this
You,
one.
you go ahead. You go ahead.
No, you're the political one.
Bill is Bill is the PhD here in philosophy
Yeah, right.
and artist. Okay.
Art and imagination have taken second.
Okay, because we have gone very far off on the materialism side of the scale in the modern world. Okay, we've gotten away from things like religion and gone way off on this materialist side of the scale. And so I've shown a number of times to the various users on the online session that we have a marina over here where I happen to live that is filled with fiberglass, right? Filled with fiberglass. And it's never out in the Chesapeake Bay, almost never. Okay, so you can go into that marina anytime, summer, winter, fall, and it'll be filled with fiberglass. And only rarely does the guy who put his spirit into getting to that piece of fiberglass ever actually go out in it. Okay, maybe a few 10 hours a year, or 20 hours a year.
That's more his ego than his spirit.
Yeah, right, which it is, right. And so that's misplaced. That's misplaced spirit. Okay, that's a dead end. That's the devil's dead end, basically. That's the devil's trick to make you chase that dream to be better than the Joneses, and therefore, and that's not where happiness is. You can't find happiness there. Okay, I bought a 27-foot boat with 450 horsepower tube, right? And the first thing my partner and I said as we went out into the Chesapeake Bay is, we need a bigger boat. Right? And the boat that I've typically shown a picture of is called Never Enough. And it's a 63-foot boat. And that guy probably thinks he needs a bigger boat too. But that's not going to buy him happiness. Because happiness has to come from a different place. That's the point. It does have to come from your spirit. Okay. Jordan Peterson can't. No, the point is, Jordan Peterson cannot tell you how to be happy.
He can't. I totally agree that having his 12 prescriptive rules for having a life, I don't really think that's the intent. And any logical person would read that and say, hey, these are some good ideas. I could apply this and I could apply that, and maybe it helps me get along a little bit. Sure. But the idea that there's someone out there who's going to follow to the T 12 prescriptive rules for life, well, then that's their own folly, in my opinion. Right.
And they're out there.
Oh, I know. And they buy the book, but I bought the book, and that's not the way I read. I come to this thing, and I say, hey, maybe there's something in here that could feed me.
I think Peterson's rules have a way deeper meaning.
Yeah.
I think they have a way deeper meaning, especially if you get into his Maps of Meaning book and and you watch his theology lectures.
That's different.
They're all everything's very deep with him. But to simplify,
Right.
do
Okay,
what's
Do this, and you'll be happy.
So apparently he's going to write a book that's more, or he is writing a book that's more Eros oriented, because I think he heard this criticism.
He had 40 rules, actually. These are written down. He'll continue to.
Right. Okay. So if you look at Maps of Meaning, That is an intensely compact book. Okay, and so you never took psychology. I never took psychology. I can't argue with anything that he said in there. Okay, because this is a clinical psychologist who worked on this book for 15 frigging years, and he says himself he reworked every sentence 15 times. I believe it. Okay, and I can't say there's anything wrong. The problem is it's so tightly packed. It's like Jung in the same way. It's so tightly packed that you just bounce off of it. Okay, I have read it. I have both a copy of it and an audible version of it, and I have read it. And I said, "Oh my God, I never thought about any of this stuff." And I'm not saying anything in there is wrong. Okay, from a clinical psychology point of view, Maps of Meaning is a brilliant book. And if I were going to be a clinical psychologist, I would want to understand every word of it and how it connects together. No doubt about that. Okay, but I don't want to be a clinical psychologist. Okay. I'm done with my career per se. I want to know how we can have a country that's at peace with one another. Okay, how we can have a United States of America. Okay, and the irony is in the U.S. military, people are not allowed to have political views. Okay, you're not allowed to say anything political. If you do, you're out. Okay, and that's what got McChrystal fired for one thing, right? And so I think we have to differentiate between clinical psychology and psychology for living. Okay, just everyday living, and I'm just an everyday liver. And so you asked me how I got into this. I started to read because I had this anima figure who got me interested in it, and one thing led to another, and all through the last 32 years almost of my life, every time I came up against a roadblock of some sort, Jung pulled me out. He's like my therapist. I've never had official therapy per se. Okay, but every time I get in trouble, I read Jung and he pulls me out. And so that's the experience I have, and the reason that this is now 790 videos on this YouTube channel, and the reason they are there is because I believe they're helpful to me personally, and I think they will be helpful to others. And I have 2,750 subscribers who also now are pursuing, at least giving me the benefit of the doubt on that.
So back to art and imagination. Is that it?
Go ahead,
Yeah.
go ahead. Yeah.
Yeah.
Don't you think a lot of the problem is the patriarchy? That we're so masculine in the way everything is organized.
Yeah, everything has to be based on math, math and engineering,
Yeah,
and we're completely leaving us aside the other side of our brain. We're not even paying attention.
So what would the other way look like?
well, I think given the fact that we're so extremely leaning in one direction, which is, well, one masculine trait is perfection. So everybody wants to, and winning also. There's not a thing you don't try to figure out and cooperate and create a contour or a process where you navigate through things. You've got to come up with a solution and nail it down. You can't go out, and if you don't win, you haven't succeeded. I mean, there's a lot of this stuff that, that if somebody pisses you off, you punch them in the mouth. I mean, that sort of stuff.
But hasn't that always been?
But I think now it's either coming to its conclusion. I think, but one thing that might lead us through it and get us out of it is actually going to be AI. But that's a whole other story, and that's because the AI that's being developed now is based on on machine learning, not on coding it. You know, where machines code themselves, where they learn to adapt and move through a process rather than someone telling it what all. You know, they used to script out whole scripts. I mean, okay, this guy's going to go in the store, buy something, and pay for it and leave. Well, they would script the whole thing out, and then they say, "No, we have an AI now that'll do that." Well, what if it's raining and somebody trips and falls in front of you? You know, it couldn't handle anything. So it's just the patriarchy is so masculine, and it's so biased, and it dismisses their whole feminine side, the whole relationship side. It's not built on the only relationships that the masculines build are the ones that further itself. You know, they don't want to. They don't want to be inclusive. They want to be exclusive. They want to win, and they want to stake out their territories. They want to put down boundaries. They want to have rules.
But you're not talking men and women. You're talking about masculine, feminine.
Right.
That's right.
Okay.
And
Because women do the
Because
same thing.
no,
no,
one of
there's
the
a man. Say there's a man artist. I mean,
Women I know do it.
Pardon?
Women that I know certainly do that.
Yeah,
They
but
compete and they want to be perfect and they
Right.
they want to win.
Yeah, but it's also it's a mindset. It's what works. I mean, who wants to jump in the midstream and try to go the other direction?
But that's what would be interesting to me anyway. What would be interesting is what does the inverse of that look like then? So what does that world look like where
Art class.
yeah.
Well, it might actually look more medieval or something. I don't know.
Is that good?
Yeah.
I don't know. Well, it doesn't have to mean that everybody lives in poverty.
Well,
Maybe it's more socialist.
it may.
Again, you know how the lights work? I'm just curious.
No, but I mean, here's the
But then you
question.
have to start asking, how many lights do you need?
True.
Yeah.
Sounds good.
I mean, remember the question of making the booth, right? How would you even address it? Okay, if you're if all you know is functionality, if all you know is functionality and engineering, then what are these booths going to look like? And somehow you have to put some feeling into it. Okay, so for example, Toyota, years ago, I used to work in Japan, and Toyota years ago moved their design shop to California. Okay, their main design shop. Okay, why? Because the Japanese are terrific at engineering. Okay, they're terrific at that, but they don't have a imaginative thought.
Design,
Right. They can't design stuff. They can make it. Okay. Once you tell them what to make, man, they can make it. Boom, boom, boom. Okay. And it's sort of like the problem that the Indians had around Y2K. Okay, because in Y2K, the issue is the problem for Indian software designers is they're brought up on a rote system, right? 2 + 2 is 4. 4 + 4 is 8. That sort of stuff. So they learn stuff by rote, okay? But then when it comes to imagining what your AI should look like, they don't have a imagination because they haven't been taught that. They've been taught rote. This is the way it is. And so what art and music and those sorts of classes bring to us, teach us to do, is to be able to imagine something different.
Totally agree with that.
Right, okay. So, but that's the issue that
It's
you
also
raised.
the difference between art and design.
Right.
I don't know what your
Right.
Art
background
for
is.
art's sake, I'm not an artist.
Yeah, but art is usually, well, design, for example, you create a solution space. You say this is, and anything, but you say, okay, this is this problem space, and we need to come up with a solution, and you invent something if you're at all inventive. And then over here, the artist is doing something, looking for not a solution, looking for a problem, really. to see what comes up, and they can make sense of it. So in a way, by being creative, you're finding something new that allows you to experience it in a way that becomes meaningful. And so the artist works with the aesthetics, whereas this guy works with, the designer works with the end solution in mind. So there's a difference between invention and creation.
Do you feel there's a diminishment of artists,
Diminishment.
or like
Oh, in our
are we less
culture.
thoughtful of artists than we used to be now than we were before?
Well, in the sense, I also think artists are reacting to that, and that's why you get some of the art you get.
Right.
But yeah,
There's art all around us, and I think it's very valuable.
it is, but it's valued in that sort of patriarchal, masculinist way, a lot of it. That's why you can get $63 million for, what's his name, just sold one. The British guy, the swimming pool guy. Yeah,
So now I want to refer to
Yeah,
a
it's all right.
paragraph of Ulanoff in The Living God, and she's talking about the feminine. Okay, the feminine, and
That's
she
right.
says
That's a tough to give you that job.
Jung wrestles with. Yeah, thank you. Jung wrestles with the image for God of the Trinity, quite rightly asking for all of us, where is the feminine? His solution adds Mary to the Trinity as the Spirit or as the fourth member. To me, woman, mind you, to me, this is an intellectual solution, a sort of overdone masculine fix-it approach to stick in the missing element, but it does not include the brooding pondering of the heart that issues in living it in the flesh. Okay, and so that's the difference between masculine and feminine. She's quite right that Jung did put Mary into the Trinity, as did Pope Pius XII in the whatever it's called, the Papal Bull of 1950, which allowed Mary to go into heaven, right? So that's the masculine approach, is to just put Mary in heaven, but it doesn't cover all the issues of instinct. Okay, and Bill's quite right. It's about instinct, and Jung was very much about instinct, and he wanted your happiness to emerge from from within you as an instinctual process. Okay, that's what he was trying to do. So it's not a book of fix-its. It's not 12 rules for life and then it's going to be okay. Right? It's going to be you have some guidelines and then something can emerge from your life experience. Okay, so that's
also meditations, aren't they?
Yeah.
I would think if I saw somebody had written 12 rules, I think those must be 12 meditations. I certainly wouldn't go out and try to, because nobody can tell you what you need to do. Except Nancy. Nancy, we can tell her what to do, and she'll do it. She's waiting for the rules. Right. Sorry, Nancy.
So John, you've been silent. You and Nancy have been silent.
I have a reading to do.
Good.
Yeah.
And this,
Can you hear from way down there?
This,
Can I move this maybe a little closer, John? That might be the best I can do.
perfect.
It really does make a difference.
This reading is dedicated to a very special soul who taught me the meaning of this through experience, just very recently. So this is dedicated to her. And this is from Psychological Reflections, which is an anthology of his writings, and it's on page 42. It reads, "In spite or perhaps because of its affinity with instinct, the archetype represents the authentic element of spirit, but a spirit which is not to be identified with the human intellect, since it is the latter's spiritual director, in essence. The essential content of all mythologies and all religions and all isms is archetypal. The archetype is spirit or anti-spirit. What it ultimately proves to be depends on the attitude of the human mind. Archetype and instinct are the most polar opposites imaginable, as can be seen when one compares a man who is ruled by his instinctual drives with a man who is seized by the spirit. But just as between all opposites there obtains so close a bond that no position can be established or even thought of without its corresponding negation, so in this case also les extrêmes se touchent, meaning the extremes come together. The archetype as an image of instinct is a spiritual goal toward which the whole nature of man strives. It is the sea to which all rivers wend their way, the prize which the hero wrests from the fight with the dragon.
So, tell us about your reaction to this.
Can I make a reaction just to the spirit part? First of all, I think Jung he left out a term. You know, he uses archetype, and he talked about archetype and spirit there, whereas and then in other places he talks about archetype and soul, because the archetype comes from within. And in my mind, you have to have another term that serves as the archetypal element of spirit. And in my mind, that's what I would call an affordance. Now, an affordance is something that came from J.J. Gibson, who is a perception psychologist back in I think he did it in the 50s, could have been the 40s. But anyway, the idea of affordances, and you hear about it in web design and user design stuff on the web, is where you walk up into a building and you go to walk through a door. The doorknob affords itself to opening the door. So there's certain things you recognize without even thinking about it that offer you opportunities to engage the environment. Spirit. And so you need something that represents the spiritual side. And I think that's where Jung fails. He has something called archetype, which is great on the soul side, but he doesn't have anything except a redundant use of that archetype on the spirit side. And that's all. That's just what I think, and how he left that part open and vacant, and I think it needs to be filled in. And that's how I do it.
Well, and I do agree with you that in Jungian study, there is this huge confusion between soul and spirit. I agree with that absolutely. I'm still confused, and I've been hosting this group.
My book will be done in about 6 months.
I see the soul more as the aligned personality, which would the aligned personality. So that would be more alignment. Soul. The being in you that is closest or is aligned best with your authentic higher self, or what Jung called the self. To me, that's what soul is.
I think it is. Okay. Well, also
whereas spirit is the energy that manifests this and brings this makes it happen.
Right, makes you do something. Soul is like, people say that person has a good soul. They're like a good person, they have a good soul, but their actions are their spirit. Right. Causes them to.
But that's the soul is the potential, right?
Bill's over here shaking his head.
To me, it's soul is fundamental. It's even more fundamental than.
It's like this. Every morning, I cook an omelet for my wife, and I find the process of making that omelet very soulful. Wow. Okay. It makes me feel good to do it. It makes me feel more whole, more soulful. It's like, I used to do a lot of painting. When I was painting, I was a crappy painter, by the way. But when I was painting, my life worked better. Okay. And so for 10 years, the painting was soulful for me.
It fed your soul.
Pardon?
It fed your soul.
Yes, it fed my soul, and making this YouTube channel feeds my soul. Okay, and so it's very soulful for me. The spirit is what's pushing me to do it in a certain way, whatever it is.
Disagree with all of that, but
You
okay.
disagree?
No, I've already said what I want to say. I didn't come with an encyclopedia of explanations, and if you believe it and think it's another way, that's fine. I don't think it's articulated clear enough though. If you don't take soul and spirit in a very abstract way, that's almost a container for everything else you guys have talked about. It's that far removed. It's that primal. It's that it's that abstract.
No, it doesn't. It doesn't mean that my definition of soul as that personality that is closest to the authentic self. The self that we don't really understand is a very mysterious thing. Then that soul
To me,
that soul can be very primal.
Well, to me, soul is like metaphysical, just about. It's before that,
Yes. I think I'm doing a bad job.
and spirit is beyond that.
I'm trying to keep up.
It's very
I
hard.
understand what you're saying.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, you're a woman.
Well, you folks have been doing a lot of
It's easier to talk to women.
things here. I don't know if we can keep up. I don't know if we can keep up with our online fans here. But it's great that we have an online chat, which where people who are knowledgeable online can keep things going. I don't think I could go back and reread all of this, unfortunately. But anyway, okay. So I'll just keep it sitting here for the time being. Okay, Nancy. What do you have a quote?
I have a quote. I have a quote here I'll read from. Okay, so this is a quote from Memories, Dreams, and Reflections.
Okay, and what section of this book is it? Up at the top.
It's called On Life.
On life.
On Life, right? Does that work? Okay. And so the quote is not too long, but it starts with meaninglessness inhibits fulfillment of life and is therefore equivalent to illness. Meaning makes a great many things endurable, perhaps everything. No science will ever replace a myth, and a myth cannot be made out of any science. For it is not that, quote, God is a myth, but that myth is a revelation of a divine life in man. It is not we who invent myth, rather it speaks to us as a word of God. The word of God comes to us, and we have no way of distinguishing whether and to what extent it is different from God. So, not quite sure on the deeper meaning of what I'm getting from this totally. So,
Well, one thing you might talk about, Skip, is the God image and how it changes over history. And by doing that, you would be explaining that you in the connection between myth and the God image. Can you do that? Is that something you pondered at all?
Well,
Because the God image changes over time. Because we grow. as a civilization. I don't, grow's not right. We change as civilizations, and the values shift around, and with that growth, there's the artists and the balladeers and everyone. They're making up stories that make sense of how we've changed and what we're going through. And so those become your myths because, it used to be it was all oral and then they started writing them down. But we still have myths. And
We have a interesting comment here, which I'd like to
Sure.
add to this. This is from Dirk, and thank you for your observation, Dirk. What Dirk says is that archetype, in my opinion, is the framework where the soul resides. The spirit is the potential. The soul is the first seed and the last leaf.
okay,
Well, okay.
stone, a leaf, an open door.
Yeah, I mean, the example I like to give about archetype and what that is the easiest one is always the mother archetype. Okay, and the reason is that once a woman is a mother, she's always going to be a mother. Okay, and so archetypes were formed long before human beings existed. And so a few years back, there are a lot of these video cameras on wildlife out in the wild, and one of those is on the Decorah eagles, which are in Decorah, Iowa. I don't know if you're aware of that. Okay, but I think it'll be 3 Februaries ago. My wife and I were watching the Decorah eagle, and she had an infrared camera on her. So it was nighttime. She didn't know there was light on her, but we could see her like it was day, right? And there was a snowstorm, and she is sitting on 3 eggs, and the snow is just piling up around her, and she's got like an inch of snow on her head. And the point is,
Mine. Sorry.
and the point is that the archetype of mother will not let her move. Okay, she will not move. That's her instinctual self, and because she has these 3 eggs under her, there's no way that she would move. That's the mother archetype in action par excellence. And so let's see if we go back to Dirk's idea. The archetype, in my opinion, is the framework where the soul resides. So this is her soul, and the spirit is the potential. The soul is the first seed and the last leaf. So the soul is the egg, and it's going to be the baby flying away, maybe, in terms of Dirk's. I hope I've given that just desserts, Dirk. But the spirit is what keeps her there, right? No, Bill, you're saying no. So tell
I
us.
already said what I think. I don't. It doesn't matter.
No, it
Oh,
doesn't matter.
I'm just shaking my head like I don't know.
Okay.
I said what I've said my piece. I'll leave it at that.
Could you re-say it because I'm still not quite understanding? Okay, so you're thinking it comes from
What
where?
spirit? What are you talking about?
Yeah. So you're saying soul comes from within and spirit comes from
Yeah, it's potential and possibility.
potential and possibility.
You've got a certain potential, and these are the possibilities you're born in with. You're born with each of these two fates. You got 2 fates. Your one fate is what your potential is. I'll never be Miss America, no matter what I do. I'll never be Miss America,
Yep.
especially now.
You don't have
I'm
that.
just. I mean, I've
You're
lost.
not pretty.
I'm not pretty
Especially now that
anymore.
I have a swimsuit.
Yeah.
Still would have won for sure.
And then here's your environment, the possibilities, the tools that are laying in front of you that you either have the potential to use or engage or you don't. And so you've got these two things going, but they're very far removed from actuality. They're it's
So the possibility is you have a scalpel and you could start working on yourself.
well, if you've got the right potentials that you can develop to manipulate that scalpel, yeah.
Yeah.
But again, that's getting very that's no longer so abstract. That's becoming much more concrete, which is a whole different level, different logical level of discussion.
Okay, so Isaiah says, Dirk, I think you nailed it. Aurora says, Bill with the hammer. But yes, I agree with Dirk. Really eloquently said. The archetype leads us to the self when we work with them. Potential, and Isaiah says, potential and possibility is also good. And maybe individuation is the process of connecting those two. Fair enough. Okay, so we're connecting soul and spirit. Would you agree with that?
Yeah, but it's usually usually through some agent or some I don't know what to call it, but we call it the ego a lot of times. Usually it goes through the ego, or it goes through some vessel, like a creative, like an artist might do it through a brush and paint. He might connect to spirit, but they come together. It's like it's
Okay.
neither one or the other. You can't talk about archetypes and soul without an ego, because you've got to have some
Yeah, you have to have
frame of
consciousness.
reference. You got to
Yeah.
have a frame of
And
reference
ego is
in order
consciousness.
to use.
Okay, so I'm a
dualistic.
portrait artist. Okay,
Yeah.
I mean after fashion, I don't claim to be wonderful, but you've seen my self-portrait.
Okay.
Okay, and so the way I do a portrait is I will get the outlines of the key features of the face by a very pedantic way. I'll either project it onto the canvas or something and just draw a little outline of it, and there won't be any creativity in that. And then I simply take a palette knife and 12 colors, which are based on John Ebersberger's color chart, and just throw paint at the portrait until I create what I want.
Well, yeah, but I mean,
And so what is soul and what is spirit in that?
well, I don't see a whole lot in it. I mean, where I see it is, I see somebody sit down and they start to, let's say they're doing a figure study, and they start to draw something on a piece of paper, and it's there's a connection they make between themselves and the subject that is exposed on the sheet of paper or the canvas, that has it doesn't go through there's no whole lot of interpretation. It's what you would just say, he's drawing what he sees, or she's drawing what she sees, and in a way that's what it is. But it's more than just seeing, because that person has weight, that person has volume, and so if any of those things are important to you, or in whatever that means, it doesn't even have to be consciously important to you. If those are elements that get across the relationship of your soul and spirit, and that sort of what's there and what potential you bring to what you have that you're observing, that's that's very different process than what you're talking about, because I know.
No, I'm saying it's an expression of myself. Okay. In other words, when I start to paint, I reach a point, which we discussed a little bit earlier on writing, where I'm no longer consciously thinking about it. It's just coming from me. It's coming from my deeper self.
Yeah.
That's coming from my soul.
there's so many different ways to, do you focus on the soul side? Do you focus on the spirit
I don't
side?
think about it.
Well, no,
Conscious.
but I mean, that's what happens when you see. I mean, in expressionism, I don't think de Kooning was trying to express himself. I think what they call expressionism, it was his relationship, his his somewhat disturbed relationship maybe with the subject matter, and he allowed that to come through. And I don't even think he was that conscious of it. It was he let go of something. See, for me, the artist works by letting go.
Yes,
You
I
allow
agree.
things to come through you, especially in writing and so forth. When you're painting, then you allow it to come through to the brush. And if you spend any time thinking about it, you're actually becoming a designer, because you're problem solving. You're not really allowing something to. You're looking.
You're not allowing yourself to come through.
Or yeah, but self is so much bigger than what you're aware of.
Sure.
So,
Yeah.
so yeah, in that sense. But yeah, okay, I said enough.
I mean, I remember this time, and I've mentioned it a couple of times here, so I apologize, where I was taking a portrait class over at Maryland Hall in pastels, and the pastels teacher comes up behind me and says, "No, no, 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 you have to do it this way and this way." And I said, "No, I don't. That's not how I paint at all, and I'm not going to do it that way." Right? The problem is there in a basic adult education art class, what people think that they're doing is they're replicating a camera. They think that that's what they're doing. They're trying to create a perfect image of the still life on the table type thing.
But those aren't artists.
They're not artists.
I mean, that's like going into a craft store and getting a needlework thing that has a pattern on it and saying,
Yeah, precisely.
I mean, that's not art.
Right,
That's
it's not
even-
art.
That's barely craft.
It's kind of production, right? It's just
Yeah, it's,
something.
it's production, but the way we get anything new that's worthwhile out there is by it coming through from the spirit, basically. Okay, I mean, that's my view. Okay, and
It's something you're not in control of.
pardon?
You're not in control of it,
You're not in control of, correct? I mean,
but it's you.
let's say that you can't separate yourself from life entirely. Okay, let's take Jackson Pollock, who's a favorite discussion here, because I had a religious experience at this table one time because of the Pollock I saw 20 years ago. And I don't think Pollock really knew what he was doing. Okay. He knew.
Elaine did.
Huh?
Oh, no. Well, never mind.
Do you think he knew what he was doing?
Well, at some point he
I mean,
did, yeah.
he was expressing his
What
self.
was his wife's name? Elaine de Kooning, and what was his wife?
Um,
Anyway, I think she knew what he was doing, and I think she probably,
well, yeah, she did.
she said, keep doing it.
Recognize the value of it.
Yeah.
Right. Okay. So
It's always the one. I mean, keep.
right, but he couldn't describe it, and I've gone into art museums all my life and not been very moved by them. Okay, I'm a thinking type of guy, typical guy, and okay, but I had walked in and seen this one Pollock, and I just started blubbering, and I didn't know why. Bill put his finger on it, but I don't
On the
think.
Pollock.
No, but I didn't think that Pollock. I don't think that Pollock knew what he was doing in that sense. I mean, it was a direct communication from Pollock's unconscious 60 years ago to my unconscious 2 years ago. It was a direct communication, but I don't think that Pollock, on a conscious level, knew that that's what he was trying to achieve.
So then, sorry,
Go ahead.
but so then I guess my question would be then: is that Pollock even doing that? If it's his unconscious, right? Is he even doing that, or is it just
Well, it's from
he's Jackson Pollock
himself.
because he allowed him
Well, that's
because
what
he
I-
allowed himself to do that?
That's when I think
Well,
about this. Dylan making a comment. He said, "Look at that stuff that was being written that I wrote back in the '60s and '70s. I can't do that. Who did that? It's like
Yeah.
he was possessed,
Right.
And,
Right.
and
Was that Dylan?
That just went through him,
Right.
Yeah,
He was a
He was
tool.
a medium.
and that's
Yeah, he
and
was a
that's
medium.
what artists are. A lot
So
of
they
artists
don't
aren't
have
very
free will.
Huh?
They don't have free will.
I guess they have the
do
free
it.
will
Well,
to
you
let that
have
happen.
the will to let
You
it
can
happen.
cap it.
There you go.
Right.
And you have to be brave, I
Yeah.
think, to do that.
Yeah, you have
Right.
to let go. And that's why, so many of them end up drinking and so forth because it's like they discover more than they're ready. They're exposed to more than what they're ready for.
Right.
They've unleashed the gates and they're going, whoa.
Right.
Well, and then they don't know how to get back to it.
Yeah, yeah.
Right.
Well, I think that also happened in the '60s to a lot of people that were that were engaged in the '60s and were exposed to more than they could handle.
Right.
And hence I was reading Jung in my 20s.
Good for you. Yeah, that's good.
So Damien, tell us something about your life outside of this meeting. I mean, do you have a profession? Or?
I do. So I'm in federal contracting.
Uh-huh.
I'm chief operating officer at a company. We do a lot of work with the Coast Guard and with DoD. And married with a few kids. I've had my two oldest kids, 21 and 18, have both come through some fairly serious addiction challenges.
That's too bad.
So I've
Sorry to hear
been
that.
they're both doing well. So I've been in a lot
Well,
of
I've sort of got one in that position.
yeah. This is very challenging.
Yeah.
So I've been in lots of while I've never had therapy myself, I've been in lots of rooms with therapists, and have seen tremendous resolve and kind of overcoming by people. We sent my son when he was 16 and a half to live in the woods for a year through this program called the Discovery School of Virginia, where they go out and they dig their privy, and when they have problems, they literally dig stumps out of the ground to work through their problems.
Yeah.
And he was away from us for a year, and we didn't talk to him for 6 months when he was 16 and a half years old. So
Wow.
that helped to kind of shape our family and kind of what I've come through. My brother is an artist. He's a musician and a writer, and probably more of the heart than of the head. And I'm much more like my father, where fairly logical. I know I'm a business kind of guy. I like boxes and I understand boxes and order, and it's not that I'm anti-chaos or any of those things. I recognize the value in those things, but
Well, I mean, I think chaos is a misnomer in the same sense that masculine and feminine is a misnomer. It causes us to think about things in the wrong way, it seems to me. Okay, because you take somebody who's hyper-logical, okay, because the opposite of thinking is feeling, right? So you take somebody who's hyper-logical, who's a typical masculine man, okay, and you tell them that they have some feminine aspects about their life, and they go, "Oh God, no!"
Right.
Where's my gun? Stuff,
Right.
And what we have to understand is that we have to develop. I mean, Jung's point was the objective is wholeness. Okay, so Jung's point is that throughout life, there is a force, may the force be with you, that is causing you to be all you can be, okay, to use the army term, okay? But we were seeing a documentary a couple nights ago about how a human baby forms. And one of the things is the cleft palate, the issue of the cleft palate. And the palate comes together in like 1 10-hour period during the gestation of a baby. And if it doesn't happen perfectly at that exact time, then you have a child with a cleft palate. And it happens one out of every 720 times, okay, around the globe. And so the point is that our whole psyche is about making us into something, okay? And consciousness is only one little thing, okay? Because, for example, they in this documentary they're talking about sperm, and one ejaculation has 250 million sperm in it, right? And if that sperm is going to turn into a baby, then it has to survive against the other 250 million
Right.
that are going through the system. And meanwhile, the heart has to have all these special kinds of cells, and those have to work perfectly for 100 years, right? And
Or thereabouts.
right.
Hopefully.
Okay, and so the point is that we are constantly in a state of becoming in our whole life. Okay, and so the psyche is also in a state of becoming. And what Jung was trying to get at was the idea that to achieve wholeness, which, okay, we're pretty much whole when we're an infant, but then we grow up, get bigger, etc., and then we stop. We stop growing. Why do we stop growing when we're 6 feet tall or whatever it is, right? But we stop because we're a whole adult human being at that time. But the psyche, we have two sides, okay, of everything. Everything is an oppositorum. And so if you're a thinking person, your inferior quality is your feeling side. Okay, whether you call that masculine and feminine, actually in the Myers-Briggs test it comes out about equal these days, right? But you need to know how to cultivate that other side, the side that isn't your natural side. You have a natural side, and it's hard. I mean, even my wife and I mean, one of the key things about Myers-Briggs is if you have all four scales the same, then you're going to have a boring life with your wife. If they're all four different, you're going to have conflict left, right, and center. You need to have either two or three the same. And in my case, we have three the same, my wife and I. But we're different on judging and perceiving. Pardon?
Yeah, PJ.
Yeah. We're different on judging and perceiving. And so, I'll open my mouth about any topic. Okay, you've heard the old saw, if a man speaks in a desert and no woman hears him, is he still wrong? Right?
Right.
Well, the answer is yes.
Right.
Right? But that isn't the logical answer. The answer is that in order to have wholeness, you need both sides, right? And so both sides eat, right? So I explain judging and perceiving as you go to the grocery store, and if you're a judging person, you take a list and you take stuff off the shelf based on the list and you go check out, whereas a perceiving person goes to the grocery store and just takes stuff off the shelves and doesn't make a list. Both parties
It's always
eat.
brand new to the.
Right. Right.
Yeah, you never know what you're going to have on the shelf, right?
Let's try this one.
Right, but both parties eat.
Parts this big.
But then we have this Alexa program now, which allows us to say, Alexa, add eggs to the shopping
Sure.
list, okay? And so I'm using that. It's a nice tool. And so even though I'm a perceiving person, I go to the grocery store. I call my wife at her work and say, if you have anything you want me to pick up, just put it on the list in the next 30 minutes and I'll get it, right? And so I'm learning to be a judging person in that sense.
Right. Oh,
And that makes wholeness,
Right.
okay? And it makes me appreciate my wife's side of the ledger, right? Because then we don't forget stuff at the grocery store. But that's just a minor example. John, you've been quiet, so let's hear from you.
Well, I just read my quote, so I guess that's my contribution.
Oh, okay. So, do you have any comments about what we've been saying?
Dive in.
Yeah, no, not really.
Why was that quote meaningful to you? Because it had a purpose. It meant something to
It
you.
was a healing of instinct and spirit, the split between instinct and spirit.
The
within
healing.
me. Yes, a
Okay.
healing.
Was this recent or many years
Yeah,
ago?
recent.
Recent. Okay. Was your
That's
spirit broken?
No,
No. Okay.
no, it's just sort of a conscious bringing together of the two. They were sort of together, but amorphous, so it sort of brought it together for me. Very special.
I have to thank all of our online chat folks because we haven't been giving you much attention tonight, and I appreciate the fact that you've gone ahead and had a chat, and I'll look forward to going back and looking at it. I hope this has been modestly amusing to you tonight. So, Damien, you were obviously motivated to come here tonight,
I was.
and
Yeah,
I don't know if objective is the right word, but
look at the list he has of all
does this seem like something that's useful to you or not?
You'll see.
It does.
I don't remember.
I enjoy the discussion.
I was using,
I enjoy, I think,
a word
some very
search.
different perspectives
And I was
probably than
going
my own,
through- I
which
don't
I
remember how I
appreciate.
did it.
So that's kind of,
Oh, I went.
to
I
me,
just
that's
went
some of the
Google.
wholeness that
I
you're
Googled
talking
the
about,
next
which
one.
is
Young
you have to be
folk.
willing to hear
Young spirit.
other things.
Okay.
Right.
What's interesting
You
is
can
that
write a paper so you can digest it.
I work around a lot of
Well, actually, I
prior
haven't,
military
right?
Oh, yeah.
people,
Yeah, well, I'm
Yeah.
doing that book.
and with
See, that's the philosophy
the
of
Me
the
Too
10-year-old
movement
autistic
and the
girl.
LGBTQ
That you
movement
learned
and all
from?
these things of late.
Yeah, that's the one. That's
I know that there are small
Which
factions
there's
that
a-
rail against
there's
these
a
things,
character
and there are small
she's the one
factions
that
that
gets
are
abducted.
hyper vigilant on the other
Believe
side.
your story.
What I'm
They were
noticing
talking
is
about her all the time. And so
kind of the
there was this
gun-toting
astrologer
people
lady
that
who
seem to
got
formally
know
be
her.
entrenched,
She's autistic, you know, so
that these movements are actually
she
having
has to interpret.
kind of an
And
impact.
so she
Yeah.
interprets what the
A positive
10-year-old
impact.
does,
So
and this is what she's
I don't
saying.
view things necessarily as
That
getting
the
worse, but I
10-year-old
view them
has
as getting
told her,
better.
because the
Yeah.
10-year-old
I think so.
is
And I think
autistic and
things
has
like
the
this
ability to-
contribute to
Right.
that.
to see
I
the
agree with
planets.
that.
So maybe I'm an optimist.
No, I think that that's true, and I think that what Ulanow's point is in these two books, written 20 years apart, is that Jung's problem throughout his life when he was writing was the psychologists didn't want to accept him because he wasn't a materialist. Okay, they wanted to have, oh, you have this symptom, let's give you this pill, or you have this symptom, let's say this to you, and then everything will be hunky dory. And
Yeah, but there's a lot
the
of
theologians, on the other hand, didn't want anything to do with him because if they admitted for a moment his point, his fundamental point is in answer to Job, paragraph 752, in which he says every religious statement of whatever kind is a statement of the psyche.
He'd just write down the answers.
It's not a statement of the physis. Okay. And he says if that were not true, then they'd be in the textbooks of natural science, which they are not. Okay. And so
the autistics.
and so that was the other thing that gave me a big aha moment, an epiphany moment, which is religion isn't talking about, and I think that there are a lot of pastors and imams and rabbis around who don't realize this. God's not up there. The devil isn't down there. They're both inside us. And these religions have developed as a way of adjusting our psyche as a kind, and they've basically been a kind of psychotherapy. Okay, they're a naturally evolved psychotherapy that came up over thousands of years.
No.
Okay, and each one is a different manifestation,
Yeah.
but they're all doing basically the same thing,
Right.
right? And
You know, her dad was an alcoholic,
And
she has
so-
a whole other axis of operation.
then there's a way of understanding God and understanding that God does exist and God is
Yeah.
acting. Okay.
Yeah.
However,
Well,
it's not as pretty
Yeah.
as the average Christian would like
me,
to
my
think it
daughter's
is.
on that too.
Okay, it's not Geppetto with strings on your arms saying, run fast and you're going to make a touchdown. It doesn't work that way. Okay, and it works from within. Okay, so there's a critical line in the movie Chariots of Fire, where Eric Liddell says, "So where does the power come from to see the race through to its end?
That's
From
his
within."
But
Okay.
you know,
And that
you know what
that
Corinne's
was
mother could
his.
do?
He said it 3 times in the
Corinne's
movie.
mother
That
could
actor
look at a
did.
book when her, or
And
she could just do it in her
and
head.
that's the way he lived his
He would
life.
say, "Hold on, my
And,
name is
and
somebody."
Eric Liddell
She
was
could say
killed
it
by
in
the
reverse.
Japanese as a missionary.
Just look at you and say,
But
you know,
but Ulanow's point
you know,
is
in
that
Iraq, you know,
there's a
Aaron,
space
blah, 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 go
between
on.
psychology and religion,
So,
which
I
is
don't
this
know.
open
Coretta may have-
space
no, she
where
just
things
could do
do
it.
change. Okay, and that's what you're talking about here, which is if you open your mind to other ways of looking at
That's different,
things.
though. But I know
Maybe you're
there's a
not
name
going to
for what
agree
she's
today.
doing. I
Probably
can't
not. But gradually, something will inflect, not only in your psyche, but in the psyche of your fellow Americans.
Right.
Right?
She didn't
And
develop a
and
history.
so the country will be different.
She's almost psychic.
And so I served 23 years in the Corps, and so from my point of view, every Marine is green. I never thought about anybody's politics. When I was deployed, I never thought about it. Never came to my mind anything about politics while I was deployed. And this was a time when there was a lot of racial tension, and there were a lot of black Marines in Vietnam who had been drafted, and they were resentful. Okay, but the Commandant of the Marine Corps in 1969 solved the problem. He said, all Marines are green. Okay, and it actually came up today where a friend of ours who may be online tonight said, Skip, I hear these guys talking about the adoption of women in the military. How's that going? And the point, I said, the Marine Corps gave that up 50 years ago. Marines are Marines. You're Marines. And all Marines are infantrymen first. And I sent him this little video. I have a 14-second video that I took down at 8th and I of the Sergeant Major of Marine Barracks, who is a woman master gunnery sergeant. She's a Sergeant Major of the barracks. And so in the evening parade, which if you haven't gone to, you should go to. But anyway, she gives this command, sound officer's call. And so here we have a black woman, Marine, Sergeant Major, giving the command to start the parade of Marine Barracks. And the person who blows the bugle call, the officer's call, is a woman Marine, also a bugler. And the point is that bugler also is an infantryman first.
Right.
Okay, because she couldn't be a Marine. She wouldn't be a Marine of any kind without first being an infantry person. Okay, and it's just I find that clip so moving, right? Because it just expresses it. And so I'm sorry we're running out of power here, so I'm going to shut this down, folks, until next week. and we will meet online. I'll tell you a little bit more of a story here in a moment, but uh, we'll meet online again next Monday night at 8 p.m. Thank you for joining. I'm sorry I didn't get back to the chats. I'll see if I can find anything that I should interact with you over the coming week about. But I'm almost out of power, so I'm going to have to shut this down.